Yo, what's up, baby? It's Fordee from Can't Stop Art. So we're continuing on the previous tutorial, and this time, basically, I had to recreate the stencil. Unfortunately, I had to restart my computer for another reason. I didn't save the document. So if this stencil looks slightly different than the one from the previous tutorial, it's just because I had to redo it. I'm sure it looks very similar. Anyway, what I've got over here on my layers palette is I have the registration marks, and then I have each of the layers of the stencil with a black layer just for printing purposes, right? You may have this set to a color because you wanted to visualize what color, etc. I just have them all black because it's going to be for printing. I'm going to go ahead and turn them all off, and we're going to select them one by one to see if there's any issues we need to fix. The bottom layer, this is the base layer that should be the full cutout. This should not have a space right here, so I'll go ahead and select my polygon lasso tool by pressing L on my keyboard. I'll come over here, click here, click here. I'm going to press Command- on my keyboard to zoom out, and then just double click here to close the selection. I'll press Option Delete with black selected as my foreground color to fill this with black. I'll press Command D on my keyboard to remove the selection, and we can move forward. That's all we had to do for this layer. I'll select the next layer by turning it on, turning off this layer, make sure I have it selected so any changes I make on this layer are to this layer, and let's see what we need to worry about. So, depends, you know, if you're using a stencil cutter, that thing is pretty precise, it's pretty exact. If you're using your hand, you have to say, well, are things too close? Do I need to make more spacing? So we're gonna zoom in here a little bit, and this thin line right here, the stencil cutter or cutting it by hand, that's impossible. You're not gonna get that. So I'm gonna press the L on my keyboard, make sure polygon lasso tool is selected, and I'm gonna try to get this. So I'm gonna click here, 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 double click here, close it, press delete on my keyboard, and we've removed it, right? And what I'm gonna do is go through each layer and try to remove these kind of things that are not gonna get cut out. So, this can be a tedious process, but the better this stencil is, the better it's going to look in the end result. So again, here, double click, it's gone. Now again, like I said, this is pretty close right here. So what we could do is come here, here. Now the stencil cutter probably has got this no problem, but I'm showing you just in case you're doing this by hand. So I'm going to come in here, and again, we could even zoom in further, make this a little bit easier. We don't need to challenge ourselves in this respect. Boom, removed, right? You see there's like a little thing right there. We can get rid of it. In here, we can leave that. We can leave that. Pressing spacebar on my keyboard, right? I can move this up and around. Over here, you see this little line? We could fill that. Press I on our keyboard to select the eyedropper. Click here to select that color. Then click the B for the brush. Now, using our bracket keys, we can make that brush smaller. And we can draw right here. And why are you not drawing, baby? So, I don't see why. Is it because... Let's select our the L for the polygon lasso tool. I'll select this. Let me see if I press Option. Yeah, I don't get why that was not filling that. That's so strange. Anyways, we can just select this like that. Press Option Delete to fill that. And now that's a solid color, right? I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to look for other issues, right? This may or may not get cut out by the stencil cutter, but I'm going to leave it, right? As far as cutting it by hand, that's up to you. Here, we're going to need to create an island. I'm going to zoom in. What an island means is you notice how there's an edge right here. And if that edge is left, then when this piece is cut out, also this transparent area and this transparent area get cut out too. We do not want that. So we're going to press L to make sure we have our polygon lasso tool selected. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to remove that little nub right there. I'm going to come in here, whoops, and remove that. And we need to be able to get in there with the stencil cutter to leave this piece, right? As far as here, we have to make judgment calls. Do we want this left in? We can either create an island by going here and creating something from the outside and pressing delete, or we could cover this so that this particular piece is painted, right? So for example, we'll do that here. We'll come here, double click, Option Delete, and we'll fill that. And we'll do the same thing here. that can be painted, right? Over here, we're going to create islands by pressing L, make sure the polygon lasso tool is selected. We're going to come in here, create a little box, press delete, and now that's there. However, it needs to extend outside of this, so we'll do that right here. Boom. Now this part will be left when you have it cut out with the stencil. Here, we're going to fill it, right? And this is personal preference, right? It's entirely up to you. Again, to fill, we select this piece, and then we press Option Delete with that foreground color selected, right? Same thing here. Let's go ahead and fill that. Now we're looking, do we have any other places here? This is not going to get cut out. Let's be realistic, right? So come back over here, fill, boom. Coming down here, what areas do we have that we need to fix? We can select this, get rid of that. This is a little bit thin. Let's be realistic. That's not going to be cut. Coming down here, what we can do is select this area, come straight down here, and we can fill this to make it solid, and then that whole piece gets cut out, right? Here, we can do one of two things. We can just create a piece here to be removed, like that, and then maybe that's just cut out, right? I don't think there's a right or wrong, except if you don't make these islands, then what happens, like right here, this whole piece inside that's transparent has solid around it. So we need to create an island, or what's going to happen is this whole piece gets cut out. So let's come over here and let's do this by selecting that, removing it, right? Let's do it again, actually. Right there, boom. And so now this piece will be cut out, this piece will be cut out, etc. And this transparency will stay. So I'm pressing spacebar on my keyboard to move this around. Over here we have, is this a similar problem? I don't know, but to make it easier for the stencil, because if there's too many areas that are too thin or whatever, it becomes a problem when you're laying that stencil down. It's flimsy, right? We can clean up this bottom edge right here. Now remember, we have a solid layer behind it. So this solid layer, if there's any little issues in our stencil, should make it so that's okay. There's paint there, etc. Deselect, let's zoom out, Apple minus or Control minus on a PC, and that's looking good except for up here. We need to fix that. So space bar, click and drag. We also need to fix this. Boom. And here, this piece, let's do it in two places in the top. Now, if we don't do that, remember this transparent part would be cut out along with the solids. So we're going to put a part here too. And again, no right or wrong. So I think if we zoom out, this right here, obviously, we need to fix that. And really, or if we don't, this whole piece gets, so I'm going to undo that. This whole piece is going to get cut out. However, just in case the Stencil Cutter doesn't pick this up as a big enough, in the program, as a big enough piece, we're going to fill it, right? So now that whole piece gets cut out, that's what we want. I'm going to zoom out. Do I see any other issues? Right here's an issue. Again, it would just get cut out, but just for our own purposes, I'll fill it so we can visualize it easier. Again, zooming out, do we see other issues? That's going to get cut out. That's okay. I'm not going to fix it. That's looking good. Let's move on. I'll select the next layer. I'm going to do one more layer with you, and then I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to come back when all of them are done and taken care of. I'm sure you don't want to see me cleaning up every single layer, but when I come back, I will show you what we do in the stencil cutting software, and we'll be right back. So in this particular one, is this piece going to get cut out with the stencil cutter? It's pretty thin. Let's leave it just in case it is. I don't think it will, but we'll leave that. So, but this one, we're for sure going to take away. So we'll come in here, bam, bam, bam. That's, whoops, Apple on Z. Let's make sure we have the right layer selected. Otherwise, we're removing things from the wrong layer. Oops. All right. So remove that. We're going to remove this piece right here. It's too small. We want to create an island here so that things are left. We want to create an island here so things are left. We want to create an island here so things are left. And this little squiggle right here may not end up getting cut out. However, one way we can make sure is if we select the brush tool, right, and this time it hopefully works. Let's press I on our keyboard to select this color, press B on our keyboard to switch to the brush, the bracket key to bring it down, and let's paint this to make it just a little thicker, right? In fact, let's undo that and let's make sure that this brush is hard, right? And we don't want too much transparency. We're just going to come in here and we're going to paint. And we can press shift between points because what it does is it makes a straight line from point A to point B. And we're just coming in here and we're fixing this to make sure that it cuts that out, because I'm sure that's an integral part to make it look a certain way, etc. Right? Over here too, let's do the same thing. Let's come here. I'm just using the brush tool to make some of these lines thicker, and by doing that, the stencil cutter should cut it out instead of leaving it because it was too thin. Now, obviously, if you're doing by hand, after you print this, you can make judgment calls with your print. Oh, maybe because the print will print it all. It's up to you whether you want to cut it out. So I'm not going to go over this because we'll remove that. I'll press L on my keyboard. Bam, 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 bam. We'll remove that. And this little thing right here, let's Command D to remove our selection. Press B on our keyboard to bring back the brush. Come on, baby. We're in the wrong spot. I know. Press B now. Okay. And we are just going to, by holding shift, I can just click and it's creating straight lines, right? And here too, maybe I could have even made this smaller, but that's all good. Over here, there's a space that looks like it wants to get filled too, so let's do that. And again, through experience, you will decide easier what should stay and what should go. And it's personal preference. With the polygon lasso tool selected, I'm going to come and remove this so that transparency stays. We need some more spacing here, so I'm going to come up in here and remove that. I'm going to press spacebar on my keyboard to come up. I want to remove this piece, it's too thin. And again, at the end, because this is a painting and not being used as a spray stencil, we can come back and we can paint lines in when we want. We are going to have a reference photograph to work from, so there's that. Here, maybe what we'll do instead of removing them is press B to switch to the brush, and I'll come and we will, I think we have a selection selected, Apple D to remove the selection. And we're going to come in here, and that was probably the problem earlier when I was unable to use the brush, is there was a selection somewhere and I needed to release it. So that whole piece is going to get cut out. I'm going to use my space bar to come up here, see if there's anything. The space between these is not enough, so let's add this so it cuts it out as a whole unit. This here too. This is a little bit small and it's like in the corner, so let's get rid of it. And again, the stencil cutter might not even pick up these things, you know. So, Apple D, release the selection, scrolling down, looking for other issues, hoping I catch them. Here, let's remove some of these or create some islands so some things are kept and some things are not. And again, this part is pretty thin. Let's do that, remove that. Let's thicken this up. Apple D to remove the selection, B for the brush, bracket to make it a little bit smaller. We're going to come here, we're going to come there, then we're going to press shift and click there to create the line to be thicker. We'll make this line thicker too. We'll make this line thicker too, just because we want the stencil machine to pick up these marks, and if we don't make it thicker, it may not, right? And again, if you're cutting it out by hand, you can determine that later, but with this stencil cutter, it's going to go here and create its own outline of the image, right? And decide certain things, and so we can help it make those decisions easier. I'm going to make sure that this stuff is left, right? So I'm going to fill that in. This stuff is a little too close together. So again, we don't have to actually use the lasso tool here. We could use the eraser tool also, but I'm just using the lasso tool. I don't know if this is too thin or not for the stencil cutter, but let's give it a little bit more space. Boom, remove that. This might even be too close, so let's press B and let's connect it. And if we do that, then that stuff is going to get picked up. Next, Let's fill this in because we want it all to get cut out. Let's press L to switch to the lasso tool. And let's remove this area right here. Let's remove this area right there. Let's remove this because it's pretty small. Let's come over here and make some removing. My English is on point. Some people ask me, is English your first language? Yes, it is. I was good at math. Leave me alone. All right, removed. And here, so I think we're getting closer to being done with this layer. Then I'm gonna go ahead and press pause. Come on, baby, what's going on? We're on the wrong tool. I must have pressed M by accident. We were on the marquee tool. Remove this. Remove, well, press escape to stop selecting. Press Command D to remove the selection. Press B to bring up the brush, and let's paint that on. Let's put a little mark there to keep that, Press spacebar to move up. Here all looks fine except for down here. We can remove these things. Remove this little thing right here. Spacebar to move there, that's fine. Now over here, we want to have that whole part painted. I'll select the brush. Oops, we need to undo this selection. That's why the brush wasn't working. And we'll come in here and we'll go like that. Maybe even cut this piece out right here, right? So we kind of kept it, but then we said, hey, we're going to get rid of this little piece, right? Press Command D to remove the selection. Let's thicken this up a little bit by selecting the brush tool. And then we'll come over here. We're pressing Shift and just clicking, and it's creating straight lines. Here we're going to draw that in. Maybe even here. So one straight line. Press here. There. There, boom. Right here, there, there, boom. All right, these things we will keep. If we left them, the stencil cutter would have left those things, cut it out anyway, so it doesn't matter. This is too small, so we'll remove it. This below it might even be too small, but I'm gonna leave it and let the stencil cutter see if it can do. I'll press Command 0 on my keyboard to reframe this, and let's see, do we have any other issues? These things, little marks, are gonna be cut out wholly, right? There's no islands. So let's use the L key and to switch the polygon lasso tool and press delete to create little islands, and that way the center part is cut out. Or left, I mean. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and press pause. I'll be back after I clean up the rest of the stencils. Right, I'll see you then. So we're back. That was a little bit of a lengthy process, and the stencil looks way different right now. You'll see that these lines, for example, in her face, well, what happened is we created islands to keep things, to get rid of things, etc. However, don't fret, it's gonna look good in the final version. And that's why I wanted you to visualize it using the colors that you might use, etc. So the next thing that we need to do here is save the different layers, right? So we can go ahead and turn off all the layers except for the full one, right? Leaving the registration marks on, so they're up here at the top. We'll go up to File, Save As, and I have here in the final folder, we'll call this Layer 01. We're gonna change it to JPEG, click on Save. Doesn't matter the quality exactly, right? Next, we're gonna go ahead and turn that layer off, and we'll turn on layer 2 with the black fill that's clipped to it selected so that it is a solid black color. Again, I'll go up to File, Save As, and we're gonna call this Layer 02. Switch it to JPEG, boom. Okay, we'll go ahead and turn that off. And I'm going to run through this real quick, and we will be back at the next part. Okay, we're back. And I just thought of something. We are working on something where I want it to be centered. I'm going to go ahead and press Command O, and I'm going to open up Layer 1, right? This is Layer 1. And it's on an 8x10. However, we want this to be 12x12. So I'll select image size, canvas size, I'll switch to inches, and I'll put this at 12x12. And I'll let it expand in every direction. I'll say okay. Boom. Now this is centered on a 12 by 12. You'll see why that's important in a little bit. I'll click on File, Save, and we'll close this out. Next, I'm going to open up the next one, layer 2. I'll do exactly the same thing. I'm going to run through this and I'll see you back in a second. All right, so we just did that, and the reason we created the canvas size to be 12 inch by 12 inch is because I don't know how to use this canvas workspace from Brother very well. After you basically trace an image, you bring it in, and repositioning the elements properly, it doesn't always work how you want it to, so better to just take it in at 12 by 12 and it centers and does exactly what I want it to do. So I can't teach you this. I mean, I know how to use it for what I use it for, but yeah, anyway, click on image tracing, we'll choose the file, we'll select layer 1. Notice this is 12 by 12, which is the size of our cutting mat. Doesn't matter the amount of colors. We'll click on OK, we'll say yes, and boom, this puppy is in the center. Now, what I can do is click on download. I can say scan and cut transfer, and it's going to send this over to my scan and cut transfer wirelessly. Boom. We'll click on close, and I'll meet you over at the camera. Boom, we're here. I've got my Brother scan and cut, and it's ready to go. Well, kind of. Here's the cutting mat, right? It's got its paper. Actually, this is a brand new one. So you take off the cling film, and right here, I have 12 by 12 cardstock, right? This stuff is pretty thick. Now, what matters if you're using one of these machines. Now, granted, if we just printed this on an 8.5 by 11 or an A4 paper, what we would have done is set that size, just like we set this to 12 by 12 in the canvas, we would have set it to the proper size, and then we would have done it like so, right? It's interesting, this is 12 by 12 cardstock, but yeah, I guess it does go as far as it's supposed to. So here, we have it centered properly on this thing. Now, depending on how thick this is would determine what settings you use for this, and also what you set your blade at. So if we pick this up, we take the blade out, we look. I know for this particular one, about 7.5, because that's what it worked for last time. However, this blade's getting dull. Maybe if it was not so dull, maybe a lighter setting, plus there's settings inside the machine. However, you have to basically play with it to figure out what you should set it at depending on the thickness of your media. So this is 300 grams cardstock or 140 pound paper. I'll press load by clicking here. Next, I'm going to click on pattern right here. You may or may not be able to see this, but I'll click on the cloud. It's going to retrieve what I just sent from the computer. It centers it. I click on OK, and then I select cut. When I do, it just basically looks at that outline data and it tells me it's going to take 1 minute. I'll go ahead and cut this one. I'll show you what the problems are, and I'll send one more to it, and then I'll finish it, and we should have our stencils ready. So I press play to start the cutting. Boom. To release this, you need to press the paper, well, click on OK and press the paper load, unload button. Boom. And it takes it out. One thing I'll note is that this mat is sticky, right? It's got like a tacky glue on it. This is paper. If I try to pull this, well, the reason I bought this brand new is because this is a low tack mat. Maybe it doesn't have that problem. But the high tack mat, if you try to remove paper, it leaves paper on the mat. And that's why I have the heat gun here, is to heat this up so it removes easier. Hit it a little bit and it should come off pretty easy. Boom, boom. You're also going to see the registration of the cuts here, right? And that's the challenge, is you want it to go deep enough to go through the paper, but you don't want to cut this mat. Obviously, you can ruin the mat. This mat costs like 20 euros. So, I don't know how well you could see right here. Let me bring it up to the camera a little bit. But you can see that line where the cutter was, right? It's okay. It doesn't matter. Now, two things here. We have a perfect stencil right here with registration marks, and this is the full piece. We also have a total piece we can put over after we paint this to do something like spray on the outside or do some type of effect. So I recommend saving this piece. I'm going to go back to the computer. I'm going to send another layer over to this cutter, and let's do one more of these. Actually, first, why don't we take another piece of paper, line this up the best that we can in the corner at 0, 0. And the better you align this, the more even the stencils will be. But that's why we have the registration marks, so if they're a little off, it's okay. I'll bring this back in, I'll press load paper. Next, I'm gonna take the cutter out and check, because look, it was at 7.5, now it's at 7 1/4. I'll reset it, because as this thing is used, like if we ran through 3 or 4 of these, it would no longer be on 7.5, it would probably be on 6 or 5, and you'll notice it won't cut through the paper anymore. Okay, so I will be right back. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to load another drawing. I'll go ahead and press Command R on my keyboard to reload this page. I could have pressed new right here, I guess also. I'll select image trace, I'll select layer 2, we'll say okay, yes, and boom, it's loaded. It really is that easy. I'll click on download, I'll send it to the cloud, and I'll click close. Let me go ahead and go back to the print. All right guys, so we're back. The first thing that we're going to do is press home right here. It says, do you want to delete all patterns? I'll click on okay, I'll click on pattern again, I'll click on cloud, I'll click on OK, I'll click on cut, and boom, it says this one is going to take 3 minutes. Let's go ahead and press play and see how it does. Boom, and we're done. 3 minutes later, pressing OK, then unload the paper. Now this time, let's take out the blade real quick and let me show you. It went from 7.5 to under 7. So notice as it gets used, the more this thing vibrates and moves and shakes and whatever, you have to reset it between each pass. Now technically, maybe we didn't have to reset it now, but we reset it after the next. But I reset it after every single one, so it gets as good of a cut as possible. This setting of 7.5 is how far the blade protrudes out the bottom. You can touch it with your finger. It's quite sharp. But yeah, to determine what setting that this should be at, you have to test. So if I use 7.5, doesn't mean you should use 7.5. You might use something different, set it at a lower setting, run it a pass, do some small square. If it doesn't cut, load the same exact paper and then put it at a higher setting, etc. Also, inside the settings of the scan and cut, you can press options, and there's a cut pressure and a cut speed. I have my cut speed set to 4 and my cut pressure set to 3. Again, you have to play with that to come up with what works for the media that you're using. This thing can cut vinyl, it can cut paper, it can cut acetate sheets, etc. So yeah, depending on what you're using. I'll go ahead and put this back in at 7.5 for the next thing to cut. I'll close that. Now I'm gonna hit this with the heat gun. Even though this low tack mat's doing well, I don't want any paper to stay on it. Boom. Look at how clean this stencil is, right? Ridiculous. To do this by hand, and notice I just hit my finger over the top to take off, I guess, a piece of paper right here. But this stencil is absolutely amazing. I don't know how well you can see, but really, really great. So we still have these pieces on the mat, so let's remove them real quick. And notice, if the paper starts to stick, that's why I have the heat gun here, so we can heat it up a little bit. It makes the glue a little less tacky, and it's easier to remove, right? Because we don't want this paper. Now you can clean these mats also, but you see like right here, that's because we need it to be a little hotter. We don't want too much of this residue on there. It will cause problems of sticking with new paper, right? You can scrape it with your fingernail a little bit. And again, a little is okay, but that's why I have the heat gun, is to minimize the amount of stickiness that this stuff or the amount of paper that this leaves behind. So, obviously, you could use like a spatula instead of your fingernails like I'm using. That would probably be more ideal. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish taking this paper off. I will cut the rest of the stencils while pressing pause, and I will come back to show you the final result of all the stencils, and I'll see you then. Alright, so we're back. I figured I would just add a few notes, thoughts, etc. Granted, you do not need a machine like this to cut your stencils. I could have printed them, like I said, on A4 or letter paper and cut them out by hand. But let me tell you this, to cut out this 7-part stencil by hand probably would have taken me all day. Instead, this took less than an hour. So let me first tell you this. If you look at this mat, you can see what we cut out, the residue of the paper, the cut marks, etc. The cut marks, there's no way around that. Obviously, you don't want to cut too deep, but we did not cut too deep. This amount of paper can be cleaned with a baby wipe. However, if you use a baby wipe to clean this mat, you may or may not have to re-tack it. Now, what I mean by re-tack, if we touch this, this is sticky. This is a low-tack mat, so it's not that sticky, but it's sticky. I used a heat gun to heat it up a little bit. It allows you to remove things. You can use something like some type of scraper. This is not sharp, but this will let you lift things easier. And like I said, you could clean it with a baby wipe, wait for it to fully dry. If it's lost its tackiness, then you're going to want to go ahead and get something like this. This Eileen's Tack It over and over. You can put a small amount of this, paint a small amount of this, maybe even tape off the sides, and that will give you a tacky surface again. After you finish using this, take this cling film and put it back over this to keep this surface as sticky and tacky as possible. Then you can store this away and use it over and over and over. I'll turn off the machine. We're not using it, etc. I'll even move it a little bit out of the way. So this is our 7 layers of stencils. Let me show you how clean this is, right? Look at this fine detail this stencil cutter can do. Maybe finer than your hand, you know what I mean? I don't know how well you're seeing the cuts, but in certain areas, like for example here, and especially the next one, these cuts are amazingly accurate, right? Doing fine details and so forth. Another thing you might notice I have over here is an X-Acto blade. Why? Because sometimes it's cut, but you need to just poke it to pop it through, etc. This thing saves you time, and it can do more than just cut stencils. You can even have it draw stuff for you if you change the head from a cutting head to a drawing head. I would never ever do that, but you can. You can also cut vinyl or vinyl transfers for t-shirts, etc. Anyways, guys, I hope you liked this tutorial. If you did, share it with your friends, comment on the video, etc., etc. In the next video, what we're going to do is take these 7 stencils, 7 layers, etc., and we're going to take our canvas board and we are going to paint it. All right, guys, until next time, I'm out.